Ah, the 70s. A time of disco, drug abuse, ultimate kitsch, and the personal luxury car. Welcome everyone to the 10th episode of the Automotive History series, where we're going to take a look at the history of the personal luxury car and, to a lesser extent, the origins of the Ford Thunderbird. Now, before we start, a quick disclaimer. As I'm about to tell the story of the origins of the Thunderbird is background information. It's my opinion that the Thunderbird laid the foundations for the personal luxury car, and the story cannot be fully told without it. You can skip this if you want. You can go to the time frame shown right now. That's where the actual story begins of the personal luxury car, but otherwise, enjoy. In the United States of the early 1950s, there was a healthy interest in sports cars. Up until that point, Europe had a long history of making performance cars. But the US, not so much. The rich and affluent enjoyed cars like the Jaguar XK120, and the less affluent, like returning G.I. Joes from the Second World War, came home with the MGs and Triumphs. General Motors was one of the first automakers to sense this potential market and came up with the Chevrolet Corvette in 1953. The Corvette was obviously inspired by European sports cars, but with some American design touches here and there. And as soon as Chevrolet has something, Ford needs to have it as well, in the shape and form of a 1955 Ford Thunderbird. Or is it? The often told story is that the Thunderbird was a direct answer to the Corvette, but in reality, the story is a bit more subtle. Ford, like GM, also saw potential in the sports car market and had ideas as early as 1950. Or, as the legend goes, in 1951, a bunch of Ford executives were in France. One of the executives points at a European exotic sports car and says, "Why can't we have something like that?" And the other executive says, "Oh, don't you worry, we're working on it." Ford was hesitant to release a sports car at first, but seeing Chevrolet release the Corvette in '53, all lights went on green. Still, there is a difference between the Corvette and the Thunderbird. The Corvette tried to chase an existing market. The Thunderbird created an entirely new market, as Ford has done multiple times later on. Think of the Mustang, which is also in its basic form a sporty car, but somehow became known as a pony car. Anyway, whereas the Corvette was a 6-cylinder open-top car, the Thunderbird was a sports coupe with classic American treatment, meaning a closed top, a high-performance V8, a luxury interior, and a decidedly European front end and fabulous American rear end. And clever marketing. Ford managed to position the Thunderbird as a car that fits the country club parking lot and is allowed to claim a spot between the big Rolls-Royces, Cadillacs and Lincolns, while still bearing the Ford logo. What eventually happened was that the Corvette and Thunderbird didn't really bite each other. Corvette was a racer, but the Thunderbird was a cruiser. In order for the Thunderbird to stay relevant, it always tried to closely follow the current design trends. The second generation became known as the Squarebird, the third generation became known as the Bulletbird, because look at that, if that isn't the definition of a rocket ship on wheels, I don't know what is. And so we arrive at the fourth generation, where I stop the tape for a moment, because this is where the actual story of the personal luxury car begins. And before we continue, maybe it's a good idea to take a moment and look at what a personal luxury car actually is. The personal luxury car is defined as a mass-market sporty coupe that puts design and comfort above practicality. In some way, the personal luxury car is an American McBurgertown version of the exquisite and delicate European Grand Tourer, or GT. I know I'm going off track here for a moment, but what is a GT? A GT, Grand Tourer or Gran Turismo, is an expensive car that bridges the gap between a sports car that sacrifices luxury for sportiness and speed, and a luxury car that sacrifices sportiness for luxury. The GT tries to excel at everything: speed, power, comfort, luxury, and style. The personal luxury car also tries to do all these things, but in the classic American and blunted way, by making it a mass-market, raw power sports coupe with some extra cushions on the seats and a slapped on waterfall grille. I hope you get the picture when I say that the personal luxury car is just the American vision of what a GT should be, and it's just really a dumbed down version of the GT meant for the mass market. It's like going to the Paris or Venice hotel in Las Vegas and coming back thinking that you've seen all of Europe. Please don't shoot me. Anyway, let's get back on track because I think I got my message across what a personal luxury car essentially is. Because we're back in the early 1960s and General Motors started to notice that the Chevrolet Corvette just wasn't competing against the T-Bird and that the Thunderbird had a market segment all of its own. Before that, GM somewhat had an alternative to the Thunderbird. Cars like the Buick Skylark and the Cadillac Eldorado were, by definition, a personal luxury car, but they were really indistinguishable from the standard production models that they were based on. They lacked the unique styling that the Thunderbird had. And that had to change. GM had a concept car lying around named the XP-175, which was supposed to be a Cadillac model, but Cadillac was having none of that, and the design was up for auction and Buick said, sure, I'll take it. The car was then released as the Buick Riviera in 1963. And my god, is that one sexy son of a bitch. Sorry, I'm just saying it. The car is just beautiful. And it is considered one of the design icons of the 60s. And I'm going to explain to you why. This is what a early to mid 60s average sedan looked like. It was literally a glass box on top of a metal box on top of 4 rubber tires. Rectangular, headlights placed in the grille, and that's it. And ooh, then comes along the Buick Riviera with the so-called Coke bottle styling. If you look at the side profile, it somewhat resembles the classic shape of a Coke bottle. And this is a design that you only saw appearing in the late 60s. I dare to say that this car, design-wise, was a full 5 years ahead of the competition. And that's what makes this car so unique, and that is what makes the personal luxury car initially so unique. It is a car that just stands out from the rest of the car models in the lineup of a car manufacturer. Sometimes they were even known as halo cars. Imagine yourself in the following position. It's the early 1960s and you're looking for a new car. You're not necessarily brand conscious, you're just looking for a nice car. So you go to your local strip of car dealerships and in your corner of your eye you spot a great looking car. It looks different from the rest. It grabs your attention. So you walk into the dealership and in the middle on a huge turntable or something like that, the car is displayed. And then somebody tells you, yeah, that is our brand new Buick Riviera. And you take a look at it and you think it's beautiful, but then again you got a family of 6. And that's not going to fit into a Buick Riviera, which is only meant for 4 people. But then the salesman proceeds to say, but we got some other great models, and so eventually you come home with the Buick Electra instead. But the Riviera grabbed your attention, and Buick sold you a car anyway. Soon GM got the hang of it, and spawned the experimental Oldsmobile Tornado in '66, the luxurious Cadillac Eldorado in '67, the sporty Pontiac Grand Prix in '69, and the affordable Chevrolet Monte Carlo in 1970, which, by the way, is a beautiful example of mass-market low-cost personal luxury car. The competition wasn't sitting still either. AMC came up with the Rambler Marlin in 1965, a car that just defines the C-pillar, and the Chrysler Corporation followed with the Dodge Charger in 1966. The personal luxury car was hot, and that was a tough nut to crack for the Thunderbird, who had the market segment all to its own. Ford got nervous, but didn't really react to it at that point. The Thunderbird was still there. Mercury had no real plans to come up with a personal luxury car, so the only car company left was Lincoln. And Ford decided to come up with an upgraded Thunderbird that was supposed to be a direct competitor to the Cadillac Eldorado by the name of Lincoln Continental Mark series. They used the Continental Mark name that dates back from cars from the 1940s, and this car became known as the Mark III. This, in my opinion, set up the turning point in what a personal luxury car is. Personal luxury cars of the 60s were different. They were unique. They were futuristic in styling, internal as well as external. But the Continental Mark III did things differently. And this idea came from Lee Iacocca. Lee thought that instead of making personal luxury cars look futuristic, it should grab inspiration from the old country. In this case, mainland Europe. And give the cars a classical treatment, full of Baroque and Art Nouveau touches, or as I like to call it, downright kitsch. And that wasn't really a bad idea at all, because in the 1970s people became infatuated with kitsch that they thought was synonymous for luxury. And the more the 70s wore on, the worse it was gonna get. They became Versailles palaces on wheels, and I always like to joke about them that the only thing they lack are crystal chandeliers in their interior. Don't believe me? This is the checklist that personal luxury cars should have in order to be competitive. A waterfall grille, inspired by Rolls Royces and Bentleys. Thick padded vinyl tops, or known as brougham tops, and inspired by brougham carriages. Opera windows, also inspired by carriages. Design references to vintage cars, like running boards. A Landau bar that is only seen on hearses today. White wall tires and spoke wheels. Fake wood everywhere, and some type of pinstriping ornamentation on the side of the car. And a model name that in some way is related to the Mediterranean coast. Throughout the 70s, the personal luxury car market became extremely popular and competitive. AMC once again stepped into the market with the funky looking AMC Matador Coupe, and the Chrysler Corporation came up with the Chrysler Cordoba, with a front end heavily inspired by classic Jags. What was probably the epitome of the craze was the car's interior, which was made of
fine Corinthian leather.
Now this term was absolute nonsense, as
Fine Corinthian leather
came from a factory just outside New Jersey. One interesting side note is that Chrysler also thought it would be a good idea to put forward the once legendary muscle car Dodge Charger as a personal luxury car that looked identical to the Cordoba. The reason behind it is that by the mid-70s muscle cars started to fall out of favor, as explained in an earlier video. By the late 70s the personal luxury cars started to decline. People finally realized that it was just a fad, and although they were stylish coupes, they lacked practicality, and with the new emission regulations they weren't so powerful anymore. A great example is the 1980 Imperial with a 5.2 liter V8. 5.2 liter V8. Guess how much power it makes? Yeah, no. 140 horsepower. Pathetic. Personal luxury cars were still available in the 80s and the 90s, like the Ford Thunderbird and the Cadillac Eldorado. They became more like specialty models, but became less and less important as buyers shifted to big SUVs. Many models were discontinued throughout the 90s. Until the 2000s. In an earlier video I explained that around the 2000s, retro styling became rather popular, and Ford saw that as a great opportunity to reintroduce the Ford Thunderbird, but now as a retro model. Guess how successful that was? That's right. Not at all. Everything that caused a decline in personal luxury cars in the late 70s was present in this very car. But now with an even heavier price tag, it was just doomed to fail. But this wasn't the very last personal luxury car to be made in America, because that trophy goes to the Chevrolet Monte Carlo. The last production year of the Monte Carlo was 2007. And if you look closely, you can see it also has some retro touches that are a reference to the first generation. And with that, we are slowly coming to an end to this video. But I still want to discuss one more thing. I am going to make a quick comparison to today's car market. Because as I discussed earlier in this video, a personal luxury car is characterized as a car that puts design above practicality. What does that remind me of? Oh yeah, the coupe SUV. The coupe SUV is one of the stupidest new trends that is out there in the car industry. Effectively, you're paying a lot more for a lot less interior space. But hey, at least it looks cool. Don't believe me? Here, take a look. Here's a quick comparison between an Audi Q7, a large SUV, and an Audi Q8, a large SUV, but a coupe version of the Audi Q7. If you get the Audi Q7, you pay 100,000 money units, so to speak. It kind of depends on where you live, but just 100,000 money units, and you get 850 liters of storage space. If you choose the Audi Q8, the coupe version, you pay 20,000 bucks more for about 300 liters of interior space less. Here is a top tip from Ed's Auto Reviews to you. If you buy a coupe SUV, you're just stupid.